This is an interesting topic, solid state batteries or solid state electrolytes.
How far are solid state batteries away from being used in cars? I've seen a few companies talk about, and I know we'll get to this in some future slides in detail, but um, Fisker has talked about their Fisker Emotion as being a solid state. I know Toyota is talking about that, and some people are heralding it as the next near future technology for EVs. But my impression is that this technology is still several years out, 5 to 10 years out, and that it needs further testing and validation.
You're absolutely right. There's huge amount of effort and focus put into this area by researchers. Every university, if they're working on lithium batteries, they have a group working on solid state electrolytes and batteries because you know people understand the importance of it, people understand the implications, but people also understand the challenges. There are huge challenges, right? So the one of the benefits, I'm just listing three of them. One of them is the structure itself. It acts as both as an electrolyte and a separator, and as a result, you need less volume of materials. You don't have to, share the space to separate, keeps anode and cathode apart. So basically, you can make it more compact, energy dense. At the same time, the liquid electrolytes can decompose if you run them at more than 4.5 volts. And that's why a typical 18650 is limited to 4.2 volts. Some of them can go up to 4.4, but if you go beyond 4.5, they decompose and leads to fire hazard. And these organic electrolytes are flammable. So that's another problem. And then some of these solid electrolytes have very high resistance to fire, and they don't catch fire easily, and they can operate at higher temperatures. For example, you can, let's say, ideally you have a solid state battery. You could probably keep your car in the hot Arizona desert without having to have complex thermal cooling system, because the electrolyte can still work at 100 degrees Celsius, right? And you can stack the cell closer to increase the volume. So see, these are some of the benefits. And this is a previous slide. We looked at the architecture for a typical lithium-ion battery. This is a simple architecture for a solid-state battery. In the middle, you have particles of solid electrolytes. You have anode on one side, and cathode on the other side. You have to have nice amalgamation, because if you have abrupt interfaces, that's going to lead to terrible performance of the battery. So you see some solid electrolyte particles in the anode and cathode to make it a seamless mixture. So this paper is from, these were written by a couple of well-known researchers. In fact, one of them was the inventor of, or the developer of lithium iron phosphate battery at MIT. And this is what people call, basically all solid state batteries can be put into one of these three categories. One is all solid state, as we discussed, lithium metal, solid state electrolyte, and then a solid cathode. The cathode also has solid state electrolyte interjected into their structure. The hybrid will have, basically, you still retain some of the graphitic anode, and transition metal, LMO, with it is NCA or NMC cathode, and you have solid state. It's kind of a mixture, right? And then there's something called anode free. Basically, there's no anode in the beginning, but on the first charge, the lithium goes from cathode and forms lithium metal on the other side. So these are three architectures that most of these hot solid state batteries fall into. And let's take a step further down and go deeper into how some of these things work. The slide looks a little bit intimidating, but we can go step by step and explain what's going on here. This gives an idea of the amount of work that is being done by the scientific community, also the complexity of the problem, because it's quite complex problem. You can't simply throw $1 million at this and then get results out of it. because it's a very hard scientific problem. So what we are seeing is basically all kinds of, just this one material solid state electrolyte magnified here, right? And that's what we are seeing here. There are many different kinds. What is called as amorphous, it's SPE means solid polymer electrolyte. There are amorphous polymers, there are crystalline polymers. So you have amorphous polymers like PO, PVDF, PMMA, and then if you have crystalline, basically you also have lithium salt added to some of these amorphous polymers to make it conductive to get the right kind of performance. And then there are famous inorganic solid electrolytes, which comprise of sulfides, oxides, and nitrites. And the reference is here. People can go to this paper and read more about it. And basically, sulfides comprise of lithium, germanium, phosphorus sulfide. It's called as LGPS in the community. And then you have lysicon, which is lithium, zinc, germanium oxide. It's lithium aluminum, germanium phosphide, and perovskites. These are all crystalline oxides. This is called LLZO. The LLZO looks like this. I got it from this paper. So basically what we are seeing LLZO here, lithium, lanthanum, zirconium oxide, garnet, can be seen here, right? There are different kinds, but it's a semi-transparent solid. And this falls into oxide category. And then you have nitrites. There's something called CSE, which is composite solid electrolytes. Basically, you take some of these polymer electrolytes and make a composite with, you use either inorganic solid electrolytes or some other non-lithium based, stuff like titanium oxide, zirconium oxide, make a composite out of it. And you have a conductive composite solid electrolytes. And each one of them have 100 to 1,000 papers written on it. Several PhDs, hundreds of PhD students working on each one of them. That's like 3 to 4 years of work, right? So you understand the gamut and the complexity of the problem we're speaking about here. And, for example, this one, LGPS, lithium, germanium, phosphorus sulfide, is a material that was, pushed very heavily by Toyota. We are going to get into that material. Sure, we'll go deeper into that material. But this gives an idea of how much work is being done by the research community into solid state batteries. And there are so many challenges for each one of them. For example, the polymers, PEO, for example, the Ziploc bag is polyethylene. But I'm pretty sure we have seen, plastic boxes, right? Plastic containers. They have PEO in them and they're flexible. So you have one solid electrolyte which is flexible, but the other stuff, garnet and then NLZO, they're not flexible. These are pretty strong, but these have higher conductivity, lithium conductivity, better than polymer, but they don't have the flexibility. And then, there are others which have some of the good conductivity, but you can't cycle them for hundreds of cycles. But to be able to put it in a commercial application, you need thousands of cycles, not hundreds. So the cycling problems, and then as you cycle them, some of the structure changes. So this slide, captures the complexity of the problem, and it is not just, that's why this material is pretty hard to make it into commercial application. It may, but I really don't know what will happen and how long it will take. I'm pretty sure it will be 5 years or more, because the cost is, if you can get all of this, let's say you got the flexibility, you got the conductivity, somehow you were able to get the cycle life, but the cost will be exorbitant. Who wants to pay like $1,000 per kilowatt hour when you can get for $100 per kilowatt hour on a lithium battery? So that makes it prohibitive. So that's why it's a bit of a complex, not a bit, it's a heavily complex problem.
So it's not just that the technology is out there and available, but probably more importantly, it's that it's commercially available at an affordable cost to be able to put into, for example, electric vehicles.
That's exactly right. To make one prototype is one thing. You can probably get decent cyclability, decent flexibility, decent conductivity, all of that. But to be able to make that in thousands and millions is a different ball game. I can make some of these, for example, so we are going to get into this material like lithium germanium phosphorus sulfide. So let's see. I think it's the next slide, but it will come soon. So this material was actually developed heavily by Toyota back in 2010, okay, and it is still yet to make commercial application, 2011. They put out this paper in 2011, all right, and it is barely making it into the commercial application now. And if a big powerhouse like Toyota, who have billions of dollars at their disposal, take 7-8 years to even make it into a small commercial application, it gives you the sense of difficulty in making, tackling this problem.
Yeah, so solid state is a nice headline grabber when these media outlets and even YouTubers talk about solid state, but there's a lot of other things to factor in. I mentioned the commercial cost effectiveness, but I would say also safety as well is one of those things that has to be validated too. You don't want to put something into a vehicle with thousands of these batteries and have something go wrong.
You're absolutely right. In fact, that was one of the conclusions from this paper. They said, well, it is a potential solution to a problem, important problem, the validation of the safety criteria, cyclability, and then is the safety good? Safety is one thing at the beginning, but is it going to be safe after 700 cycles or 1,000 cycles? So how can you assess the safety at 700 cycles or 1,000 cycles without running it for 700,000 cycles? So in fact, one of the contributions by Professor Jeff Don was something called high precision coulometry. Basically, what would take 10 years, you could probably get the result in a much shorter time. Because if you can only learn something by cycling it for 10 years, that's unrealistic.
Yes. So, yeah, that's correct.
The problem with one of the issues, bigger issues with solid state batteries is the issue of interfaces, right? There are multiple interfaces in solid state batteries. And I wanted to share this small quote by Wolfgang Pauli, who was one of the founding fathers of quantum mechanics. He said, "God made the bulk, but surface was created by the devil," which means to show that the complexity at the surface. So when you bring in solid state batteries, you have solid electrolyte and cathode interface, and then cathode and then carbon additives interface, and then the current collector and then cathode interface, current collector and carbon, current collector and solid electrolyte interface. So lithium has to have impeccable diffusivity through all these interfaces. You need to improve many of these, make sure the interface is conducive for lithium transport at a fast rate. So, when you flow the gas pedal, it is able to give that energy. That means, lithium is trying to pass through all kinds of interfaces here. So the more interfaces you have, the harder the problem gets. So this is by the paper, Understanding Interface Stability in Solid State Batteries, in a pretty prestigious journal. The people can go into this journal paper and then read more about it. But basically, you need to solve, this is basically you can coat some of the cathode materials and then mix it with the solid state batteries, solid electrolyte particles. And you still need to ensure the contact is good, because if the contact is not good, then it leads to a hotspot. It's like a tiny hotspot that can grow and grow and then lead to catastrophic failure. So that's the problem. That anyway, the interfaces, this is something they must solve. And then the issue of, for example, some of these oxides are pretty stiff, brittle actually, I would say brittle and then stiff, right? So if it is very brittle, then how are you going to make a cylindrical cell? Or maybe you just need to make a flat pouch cell and make sure there is no inadvertent pressure on these kind of batteries. Basically, if the battery is a little bit compliant mechanically, that's good because it gives it the kind of toughness. But if it is too brittle, then that can lead to that can become a failure point on its own, because if one brittle fracture can lead to a isolated region, which could lead to all kinds of problems. So to summarize the issue of interfaces, let's put those two things together. This is from the same paper. We have bulk interfaces. At the bulk interfaces, you need to solve the problem of porosity. Different materials have different density, and then you need to make sure it's a seamless mixture. You need to make sure there are no confined pathways. For example, lithium should have sufficient sites to go from one side to the other. If it is all concentrated in one point or other point, then it can lead to imbalance, and that could be a failure point. It has to be uniformly, going back and forth, and the whole interface has to have right kind of porosity, density of materials. Pathway should be existent along the whole surface. So that's at the bulk level. And then at the surface level, you have chemical instabilities. These interfaces need to match up chemically also. If they don't match up chemically, if one of them has a tendency to undergo oxidation or reduction at the surface, then that's not good, because then it could lead to, for example, sulfide-based solid electrolytes have a tendency to release H2S gas, which is not good. And that is at the surface. And then at the interface, many of these small interfaces, right, between the particles, between the electrolyte, between the electrode, you need to make sure there are no drastic volume changes at high temperature. As the cell starts working at high temperature, it should not lose conductive pathways. So then it just, then if let's say because of high temperature, one of them expands rapidly and loses contact with the other interface, then you lose this pathway where now lithium cannot go to the other side because of excessive volume change. And then there's something, so bulk, right? We spoke about bulk. At the bulk, you have porosity. For example, if you use polymer, then they should have the right kind of porosity, density, crystalline structure. At the surface, there should not be any inadvertent oxidation, reduction, the other chemical reactions. At the surface interface, you need to have the right kind of contact. And then you have something called grain boundary. A single crystal is better than polycrystalline, because the more boundaries you have, tougher it gets. And that's why single crystal is better. And then there's something called grain boundary resistance, space charge effect. So there are all these things to tackle for at different levels, from bulk to grain boundary. And you have to solve all this, whether it is a polymer electrolyte or an inorganic solid electrolyte. You have to solve problems at all these time length scales. So that is why it's a hard problem. It is taking so much time. And one great example is Toyota. As you know, Toyota, right? They have been making a lot of news, and they're supposed to release their solid state battery this year at the Tokyo Olympics, sometime in August. And this is something they have been talking from 2011, right? When Tesla came into existence, this is the only EV that have not put out and this one probably Honda, but they have not put out a single pure battery electric vehicle. They have lots of hybrids. They have Mirai, which is a fuel cell car, but there is no pure electric vehicle. And they're supposed to showcase this. This is Lexus LF30, and apparently this has pure solid state. In fact, the prototype shows that the marking on the door threshold, it says solid state. So this goes back to 2011. In 2011, they developed this material called LGPS, lithium germanium phosphorus sulfide. And at that time, it was pretty remarkable because it had 12 millisiemens per centimeter at room temperature, whereas the organic liquid electrolytes have about 10 to 20. So basically what it is you can look at this material as a huge building with multiple hundreds of rooms. And then there are hallways which are open for lithium to move. So this lithium can traverse from one end to the other end because there's a open pathway, or in a building, long one directional hallways, right? That is really conducive for lithium transport. So they published this paper called a lithium superionic conductor, and they proceeded to develop more on it. In 2016, they improved upon it. So they had lithium, silicon, phosphorus, sulfide with some carbon on it. And that had a remarkable conductivity, ionic conductivity of 25 millisiemens per centimeter. That is remarkable for a solid electrolyte. So yes, you can see this is the skeletal structure, and then within the skeletal, you have lithium. The green structure shows where lithium can go. So you can see long pathways, which provides wonderful connected pathway for lithium to go from one side to the other. So that's why they call it like superionic conductor for lithium. And they show what this graph shows is all solid state battery here. For example, supercapacitors can have really high power density, but their energy density is very low. Okay. But you need to have this is a Ragon plot, and this plot shows where you need to have your energy and power densities. So on one side, you have supercapacitors, which really high power density, but low energy density. You need to cross this line, right? Red line. You need to have both energy density and power density to be able to, use it as a EV battery. So what we are using, lithium-ion batteries is right around this point here. But their prototypes showed solid-state batteries with really high power density and also very decent energy density. But the problem is, again, we discussed the cost. At what cost? Is it $1,000 per kilowatt or $2,000 per kilowatt hour? Can you not only the cost? Let's say somehow Saudi Arabia said, "Well, we are going to invest $1 trillion into this and make it happen." But is it possible to manufacture millions of tons or thousands of metric tons of this material? That is another question, right? So they have done some amazing work, and even though they started doing it in 2011, it is barely making it into commercial applications now. So it gives you an idea of how complex this problem is.
Why do you think that Toyota has sort of conceded on electrification as we know it today? I believe both Toyota and Honda have made public announcements about how they don't believe electrification is the way of the future. Is it possibly because they're behind the scenes trying to develop the solid state battery?
I think so. They wanted to make sure there is no fire hazard associated with these batteries. And by nature, they take a very conservative approach. They don't go all out into one thing. They want to make sure that everything is set before they put in billions of dollars into it. In fact, I'm pretty sure they have put in significant amount of money into solid state battery development and other stuff. But it still perplexes me why they would put money into hydrogen fuel cell, but not into electric lithium-ion battery electric vehicle. But as you said, they were working on all kinds of things in the background, whether it is solid state electrolytes or even lithium-ion. But I think they are trying to hold off, make sure everything is kind of, foolproof before they can jump all in. But why do you think, you have spoken with some of the, CEOs and people really who are leading some of these companies. What is your insight into this?
I don't know. I mean, it's a lot of speculation at this point in terms of where the future is. I have a lot of ideas in my head, but none of them that I can say are formulated to talk knowledgeably about. I do wonder why some of these Japanese automakers are not moving a little bit more swiftly towards or away from the internal combustion engine and towards electrification. Is it because they know that they've got a solid state battery that's less than 5 years away, or is it because they really believe that the internal combustion engine is still superior? I don't know. In the meantime, companies like Tesla companies like Tesla are gaining market share, automotive market share, and doing it seems like incredibly fast.
Yes, for Toyota and Honda, it is not just bringing these electric vehicles into the market. They will also be cannibalizing their own present vehicles, right? They don't want to sacrifice their present profitability to promote something that is not fully established. So they would take that into consideration. And as you said in one of the videos, Tesla has nothing to lose. They will go all in because that is their only plan A. There is no plan B. If it fails, then they have to make it work. I think it's you or Matt who's mentioning this. But for Toyota and Honda, they have plan A, B, C, D, E, F. So, and at the same time, they have to feed 60, maybe 100,000 employees, and they have to give them bonuses. They have to give them raises, So they have to take all of that into consideration before putting in all their resources. And actually, so there is an example of, I'll come to that story of Dyson, right? I will talk about it. What happened to Dyson, who put in a lot of money and effort into it, and then they just got out of the market this year. So anyway, to summarize the solid state battery, I put this slide together. So what we are seeing on the left is a commentary by Professor Mandiram, who is actually a colleague of Professor Goodenough. In fact, he was a postdoc with Professor Goodenough, and he became a professor at UT Austin. And the Nobel Prize ceremony this year, it was Professor Mandiram who gave the speech because Professor Goodenough was not on it. He was on a wheelchair and he didn't want to stand there for 45 minutes. So he wrote a paper about solid state batteries, and this is what he comments, okay? The improved reliability of all solid state lithium ion batteries makes them appealing for large scale applications. However, for all solid state lithium ion batteries with inorganic solid state electrolytes, key challenges remain, such as the volume change in the electrodes, interfacial charge transfer resistance, flexibility concerns, and poor cycling stability. Solid polymer electrolytes overcome some of the limitations of the inorganic solid electrolytes. That is, they have good flexibility and contact with the electrodes, but they have narrow electrochemical stability windows and low ionic conductivity at room temperature, which currently impede the development of polymer-based. So, and then they share this table where they highlight the advantages and the disadvantages for each one of them. Previously we showed a big picture, kind of a collage that talked about oxides, sulfides, hydrides, halides, thin film polymer, all that, right? For each one of them, they highlight what is the advantage, what is the disadvantage. For example, if you look at the polymer, it has flexible, stable with lithium metal. It is flexible. It is easy to produce. Polymers have been around for many years and people know how to make them, but limited thermal stability, low oxidation voltage, and some of the sulfides have low oxidation stability, sensitive to moisture, poor compatibility, and many of them have cycling. For example, they may not sustain thousands of cycles, and they've not considered the cost. Some of these materials can be pretty expensive to make in large scale. That goes to our next point, which is they will still be used in some key applications like RFIDs, medical devices, and energy harvesting in wearables. Wearables are a big thing in the current market. A Fitbit, Apple Watch, all kinds of stuff. So there is and drones. So there will be some applications which will still use in small quantities, but for bigger applications like EV, there is no other way. You have to overcome some of the other challenges because when you're transporting 3-4 people or 100 people, safety is a huge thing. If you have an RFID at this small scale, even if it catches, if something goes wrong, it may not lead to a huge fire like an EV does, because basically, at that scale, you're sitting on a potential bombshell, so so they need to make sure it is absolutely safe. So that leads us to Dyson. It is a very interesting story, right? Back in 2015, this article is from 2015. Dyson acquired solid-state battery startup called Sakti out of University of Michigan, and they acquired that for $90 million. And then they start in 2017. They're pumping in billions of dollars into their venture, which is to make electric car. But in 2018, it looks like solid-state batteries becoming less likely. And what we see in 2019 is a sad story. After so much effort, hundreds of people spent several years into this. They put in $2 billion into this, and then they completely scrapped the project. And they said they don't want to take this hit anymore because what we discussed in the last 20 minutes, the complexity of the project, different materials, getting the cost, getting the cyclability, getting the safety at a commercial scale is a humongous challenge. So it goes to show even big names like Dyson, who had the financial and technical wherewithal, couldn't make it happen. So no wonder Tesla is not using them, because they understand the challenges. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure Tesla is testing all kinds of solid-state materials, but they stuck with what they knew, lithium-ion batteries.